Welcome back to Beau's Workshop. This is the second part of the Swamp Jon build. The Swamp Jon is a 10-foot wooden fiberglass Jon boat that I designed and built at home using mostly reclaimed wood, scrap wood from other projects. I did have to purchase some fiberglass cloth, epoxy, screws, and various other little hardware bits to put this together. But overall, right now, I'm only about $400 in on this build. And if you enjoy this build, if you like this boat, then I have outlined every step that it takes to build this boat. That's one reason why we did this video in two parts, but the measurements are included and every step in the boat building process is outlined in these two videos. So I hope you enjoy that. Once I get the boat registered, I have a 2.5 horse Johnson, and we'll put that on there. I'll do a performance video showing how that it works with the motor. We'll put a trolling motor on it, see how that goes. I'll paddle it. I'll use a push pole and pull it around so you can really see how this boat will perform. But I hope you enjoy these videos, and I hope that you can put this information to use. If you have any constructive comments on how I could do a better job, I want to elevate my video production game. I'm more of a blacksmith than an IT guy, but I'm going to strive to do my very best to move forward with this channel. So I appreciate your support. To make my life a little easier, I'm just going to seal the bottom of the flotation pod seat before I put the side on. I'll just make it easy. And it won't cause a bunch of drips. I won't have to crawl under the boat. I could just reach under there. So anytime you can plan ahead, make your life a little easier, that's a good idea. Another thing I did was I just rounded off the underside of the shear clamp. And if there's water in the boat, you need to dump it out. That little rounding lip will just allow that water to get out a little bit easier. I'll end up doing a wood flour epoxy fillet. So it'll be a pretty nice ramp for water to roll out of. This boat's not big enough for me to want to put a drain plug in it. Also, I can come in with wood flour and epoxy and I can start filling in the screw spots. Just while everything's out and open. I'm going to cut a 1x4 and put it in here so I can have more surface to attach the side with. And I'm going to leave a lip because I'm going to put a panel on the inside of this front frame. I'm trying to decide if I want to put a cooler up there or if I just want like a dry storage with a hatch in the bow of the boat. You could put a battery up there. I mean, the options are limitless, really. Got a piece of luan for the side of the boat. I end up making it a little bit longer. If there's any kind of shape, if you have any rocker in a boat, it's just easier to pin the luan up on it and trace out the edges with a pencil. So I got this junction tight enough. There'll be some wood flour epoxy filler that ends up going in there. Left a little overhang so I could make sure the transom was perfect as far as the rough cut. Of course, we got to round off all the edges before we fiberglass it. But I just have my pencil line tracing it out. Makes it really easy instead of plotting out a bunch of measurement points. I'm attaching the sides. I just have to put PL Premium all along the frames and then we'll screw the side to it. Ends up looking like that. Once the glue dries, then I can come in with the belt sander, clean up any little spots that need to be cleaned up. I can round the edges and it'll be ready for fiberglass. Use the thickened epoxy to fill in all the little divots and little imperfections that I wasn't happy with. Tomorrow I'll hit it up with a sander and start getting some serious fiberglassing going on here. Get this thing ready to float. I had some technical difficulties with the last clip that I tried to film. On the bow of the boat, I made a sandwich of fiberglass. So I took a piece of fiberglass cloth and I laid it clear down the entire hull. And on the bow, I had taken some thickened epoxy that I thickened it with wood flour epoxy, and I went over this whole surface. And I laid the fiberglass cloth over that. This piece of wood here is the top of the sandwich, and I really put a good amount of epoxy on the other side of this board, and I essentially bonded together two panels and made a little stronger fiberglass composite. Now this is good and solid. It doesn't flex at all. It gave it a lot more rigidity. So now I'm going to have to fiberglass over the whole hull again. I'm probably going to end up doing 2 more coats of fiberglass. So it'll pretty much be 3 layers of fiberglass cloth to strengthen this up. I rounded off the edges. You can't fiberglass over a square edge, so it has to be rounded off probably around a ½ inch radius, about as round as a man's finger. If you really want to get some good information on fiberglassing, there's Captain Joe on Fish Bump TV. I'll end up putting a link in the description. But if you really want to get solid at fiberglass work, he's probably a better resource than I am. Now, I had some weather coming in, and the humidity is going to be really high, which is not really great for fiberglass. And so I kind of did this in a rush. And then there's little screw holes that I didn't have completely filled in. So when I put the fiberglass cloth over it, there were some little bit of air pockets. So I've gone over the whole hull, and in the area that wasn't to my liking, I dug out with a razor knife. I'm going to come in with some thickened epoxy and patch all these spots up. So when I do the next layer of fiberglass, everything will be really smooth. So once you get your epoxy and your resin in the container, then you want to stir it up for 3 to 5 minutes. You want to really make sure that everything's mixed together properly so that you don't run into problems with it curing. And once I'm happy with how much I've stirred this up, then you can add this wood flour epoxy. I'm using a System 3 brand. Seems to be a pretty good deal when I buy it. It's always worked out fine, so I haven't had any reason to try any other products. There are some other products, maybe it doesn't involve wood flour, but I like to leave a lot of the wood exposed, and this ends up making a nice wood color filler. And you can use it sort of like Bondo to fair out the hull. Not that I'm very good at the finish work, but I do the best I can. It's better just to mix up enough to be able to work with at a time. You can always mix up more. The stuff's kind of expensive, so you don't want to waste a lot of it. So once the epoxy's good and mixed up, you start adding a little bit at a time. You want it about a peanut butter consistency. I'm gonna need 2 hands for this. I'll shut the video down, but you just gotta keep adding a little bit until you get that thickness that you want. So this is a pretty good consistency right here, where it'll stay on the stick. Gravity's not gonna make it drip too bad. When you mix epoxy, there's not a lot of room for error. It's a 2-to-1 mix, so you can get these graduated cups that has these marks. So you'd fill up to number 2 with the epoxy, and then you would finish off filling it to 1 with the hardener. And as long as you have that mix pretty much perfect, you don't run into problems. If you have a little too much, it just won't cure. Now if you're using polyester resin, you get a little bit more grace with that, but the epoxy, you have to be pretty precise. I have all the little imperfections filled with that thickened epoxy, so we're ready for fiberglass. Now there's a couple areas with the fairing process where I've exposed bare wood, especially here on the edges. So before I lay the fiberglass cloth down, I'll wet that down with epoxy so that it can soak in a little bit. If you don't have just the right amount of epoxy with fiberglass, then you'll end up having some dry fiberglass, and it won't be as strong and it won't bond properly. So when you have the bare wood, you just want to wet it down a little bit. if you're a beginner and you've never worked with this stuff before, when you're fairing out the hull, you want to be real careful on the edges. If you're using power tools, you can sand right through that fiberglass cloth pretty easy. I typically work with 6-ounce cloth, and it doesn't hold up to much sanding on one of these hard edges. So the first boat I ever built, I ran into a little bit of a problem with that. I had sanded it. It looked like it was good. I finished it out, painted it. It lasted a couple years, and then the seam separated because I had sanded through the fiberglass cloth too far. There still were some strands, but it was compromised. And you can avoid that mistake by keeping an eye out on that, or add some extra fiberglass cloth around these edges. I like to put a lot of fiberglass cloth in the corners in any area where you're going to have a lot of wear. So here toward the bow of the boat where this transition is, if you're pulling the boat up on shore, it's going to scratch that up, obviously. So you can add some additional fiberglass cloth, put a little bit of thicker paint, get a little sacrificial layers to be worn away, and then you're going to have to touch that up periodically. I'm going to pre-cut 2 layers of fiberglass cloth. So I'm just simply going to roll it across the hull till it's the length I want, and I'm going to cut it off, and I'll make one more piece. So I have the fiberglass cloth draped over the hull, and on this side I'm bringing the fiberglass clear to that top edge. And you can play with the angle that you lay the cloth at, and it'll flex around some angles. So this side I have lying pretty flat. As I come back to the transom, it's obvious I'm going to have to make a couple cuts to make this lie flat. So we can just kind of refer to that as a pleat. As we come to this side of the hull, well, the fiberglass isn't going to make it clearer to the other side. In the next layer of fiberglass, I'll start with the edge at this bottom, and I'll have it go back the other way. So then we'll have 2 solid layers. We'll actually have 3 layers on the very bottom and coming over this edge. And we'll cut pleats out. We'll get this to lay as flat as we can. We'll epoxy it on. And as it starts to set up, here later in the day, maybe around 5 o'clock, it'll kind of half be dry to the touch. But it won't be fully cured because I'm using a slow epoxy. That'll allow me to lay the next layer of fiberglass cloth on there without having everything shift around. But because the epoxy is not fully cured, we'll actually be able to get a better chemical bond from one layer to epoxy to the next. With this layer, we're relying more of a mechanical bond. I went over this with some heavy grit sandpaper, some like 50, to scratch everything up to give some little grooves for the epoxy to grip to. But the next layer will be relying, on the texture of the fiberglass itself for some mechanical bond, but we're looking to get a good chemical bond by doing it in close enough proximity to achieve that effect. I'll just do a quick walk around now that I cut the relief cuts. Have nice surface contact all the way around. The parts that are kind of draping off when we wet that down, we're going to get it to stick to the sides. Some of them little dimples, once it gets wet, the fiberglass will end up stretching. You can kind of wiggle it back and forth. And it's more moldable than what it would sound like. It's very cloth-like. As I mix this up, I make sure I scrape the sides and scrape the bottom. I can't stress how important it is to get a good mix on this. If you read the directions, it says mix it for a good 5 minutes. I've been stirring this quite a bit before I started rolling the camera. And if we look at the graduated cup, I have about 2 cups that I'm working with, or somewhere around 450 milliliters if you're dealing in metric. Okay, so I'm just going to get this out of the can. That'll keep that from kicking off. I want to push the epoxy around, get a nice wet out in the fiberglass. this step you want to use as little as possible. You want it to be thick enough to really absorb in on the fiberglass cloth fibers, but not to where it's pulling up. The roller kind of helps me work out any air bubbles, rolls it out flat. Sometimes I use a squeegee, spread it, it's pretty nice. Just drag some epoxy from a puddle and pull it where I need it to go. I mixed up another couple cups of epoxy to do the sides with, and obviously I just can't pour a puddle on the sides, so I'm going to put the epoxy in a roller pan this time. Some of it will be in a rolling pan, some of it will stay in a cup. I'm going to have to work a little fast, make sure this doesn't kick off in my hands. Get a good 10-15 minutes to work with at max. Going to work from the top edge down, let gravity help me out. First I'm just going to get some wetness on there. Start working this way into the fiberglass cloth. I'm pulling down over the edge. It's going to help pull down on the fiberglass cloth. As you roll it, it'll push and stretch it. So if you push and stretch it in the direction that you want, then you'll get an easier time. If you're pushing against where it needs to flex to, then you're going to get a bunch of wrinkles to have to fight with. It might take a minute to get the stuff soaking in. I'll just get it wet starting out. You need to add more, but you get too much, it just runs off on the floor. If you're finicky about your floor at all, you better have some plastic down. If it's a painted floor, it'll pull up paint, maybe even some concrete with it if you try to scrape it up. All right, I was able to get everything to lie pretty flat. There's one little spot over here that's not wanting to lay flat, so I'm just going to take the scissors and cut a little relief in that, and I'll pin it down. So adding a little bit of extra epoxy on the edges where I had this dry wood. Make sure that all soaks in good. As soon as it starts to tack up, I'll put the second layer of cloth on. Barely had any wasted, I don't know if you can see that. The benefit of mixing up a little bit of it at a time. You don't overdo it. Does it kick off in the can? Needed a little bit more epoxy resin to do this job, and luckily it was delivered right before I started filming, so that was good timing. Anytime I use US composites, they get the materials to me pretty fast. They're in West Palm Beach. I'm in Citrus County, Florida. It's not like it's very far. but it makes it convenient. I've had good customer service. So I'm happy to do business with them. Never had any trouble with their products. My favorite thing is you can order the fiberglass cloth on a roll. If it gets shipped and it's been folded up, it makes some creases in the cloth, and it'll flatten down eventually, but you really have to fight with it a little bit. If it's on a roll, it just lays down nice and easy, no problem. It costs a little bit extra, not enough to make you not want to do it. Managed to get a layer on here. There's hardly any seams overlapping. This is a very forgiving shape to be able to fiberglass. If you're new to boat building, this is definitely one to try. You don't have to worry about it being perfect. This is just a little utility boat. We're going to go beat it up. We're going to have fun with it. We're going to throw it in and out of the back of the truck, slide it down in the canals. There'll have to be some maintenance, and I always try to build the next boat a little bit better. I always try to up the skills, but I know that, I make some errors. At this point, I've never ran into a problem that I wasn't able to work around some way. I haven't made a perfect boat yet, and I don't expect to make a perfect boat in the future, but it's perfect for the purpose, and you don't have to be afraid to go for it. Just give it a shot. It's cheaper than a college class, that's for sure. Add a couple little triangle pieces to the corner. Just make a little triangle piece to span the corner. Give a little extra support. Make sure you get everything nice and overlapped. Just made little chunks from the scrap. All right, I have the fiberglass here on the hull finished. It's just a matter of letting it cure and fairing it out, getting it ready for paint. But we have officially shifted from having a giant box to having a boat. So I'm pretty excited about that. I've added some reinforcement in some high wear spots. With my intentions on how I'm going to use this boat, I mean, it'll be getting slid around on the ground a little bit. So I have some sacrificial layers of fiberglass to keep me from having to do major repairs. Give me some little wearable edges. All these corners are reinforced. About every step of the way, I've put a little patch in these corners. So it's probably 5 or 6 layers thick of 6-ounce fiberglass cloth. Most of the hull has 3 layers. These top edges have less than 3 layers, about just the way the fiberglass fell. But it's going to be watertight. It's going to be very tough. I think it's going to work out great. And we're working on cleaning up everything that we've done so far. So in this shear clamp, I came in with the belt sander and I cleaned it all up, shaped it all up, rounded off the edges, getting it ready to cut out a piece of plywood for the bow. This side, I still have to do some grinding. Anywhere there's a gap, you got to get that closed up or fill it full of thickened epoxy. You want no gaps anywhere. I'm going around and cleaning up anywhere where the glue's smushed out. I find that it's way easier just to clean up things as you go with each step. I'll round off some of the corners of these boards up here. I'm going to thicken epoxy. I'm really going to seal up every corner and crevice. This will end up being like a dry storage area. These are the tools of choice for this job. We got the DA sander. I have an angle grinder. I have a Harbor Freight sander, dust mask, a scraper, knife, little saw. And you just start working out any little blemish and fine tuning things. We're going to start final fitment and get it ready for varnish before too long. All right, so a little trick that I picked up along the way to use this wood flour thickened epoxy is you can put it in an icing bag, and I can cut the tip of that off, and then I can just lay beads of this epoxy like it's a caulking gun. So just nip off the end of that, and then I can just lay a nice little bead of epoxy to do a fillet with. This way I can fill every little nook and crack. Make sure we're not getting water infiltrating deep into the wood. If you get water trapped in there, you're gonna have a problem. I'm gonna bond a panel around this frame. Just a nice little way to get epoxy where I want it. Use a little bit more control. Using an icing bag trick, that bead of epoxy can just be smoothed out to be very controlled and easy to seal up those little cracks with. This is a piece of 1/4-inch Sandyply I picked up from Home Depot, and I don't know if you can see the patterning, but there are a lot of really kind of neat knots. Kind of reminds me of a guitar top. And this isn't my favorite material. It's not as strong as Lowe's Revolution ply, but I'm going to make a fiberglass composite panel. I'm going to fiberglass one of these pieces on the top and bottom, and we'll glue everything together to make a stronger panel for the bow. But the very top, I want to have this wood patterning. Once I seal it up with epoxy, I'll come in with spar varnish, and it'll have a really nice wood grain finish, and I think it'll be beautiful and it'll be strong enough for the purpose. I'm cutting 2 panels to be exact. This piece doesn't look as good as the other piece, so this will be the bottom of the sandwich. So I'm just going to use a pencil and trace the outline of the bow, and then cut that out, and then we will fiberglass it. Have the piece laid out, and I'll just have to cut along the lines. This second piece is going to be the top veneer, and you can see some of the patterning of these knots at this angle. So I'm judging what I think is going to look best with this wood grain pattern. So I'm positioning it on the bow to try to maximize that aesthetic value. Then I'll trace the lines out and cut it, and I should have a really nice looking product. There's a little bit of blemish in this wood grain. There's something scraped across it. Whatever you do, do not hit this surface with a power sander. If you want to preserve the look of this grain, do not use a power sander. I'm just going to have some fine grit sandpaper. I'm just going to gently, ever so gently, just smooth this out a little bit. And by the time we get the fiberglass and that epoxy fills that up, if you can see it, you won't see much of it. But you do not want to use a lot of pressure. You do not want to sand hard. If you want to preserve this wood look, you can ruin that piece of wood barely touching it. I'm building a frame for the deck hatch, and I'm making a trough, so if any water comes up over the bow, it'll get caught in this trough and drain this somewhere. I haven't quite figured that out yet. But at any rate, this is the best I could come up with. So we got some component parts. A little hole for that to drain from that trough, and then it'll come down here toward that one frame. I'm going to glue it together with this clear Gorilla Glue. It's not supposed to foam. I've used the foaming stuff. It's not too big of a hassle, but I think that will be a little better for this purpose. But this frame will also help hold the deck, so when I'm standing on it, this will provide some structure. I'm locking up the deck frame. I use this straight edge to plot some points so that I can make the hatch match the frame. You could take some nice measurements and plot that out on the board. There's a little bit greater chance for error with that. So with the deck lid, I just transposed those points and drew out a line with the Sharpie to cut out the hatch door. I have the top piece of the bow sandwich, and once I cut the first one, and I'll trace that out on this second piece, and we should have a good matching fit. All right, I cut the hatch out, those transposed marks that I showed you, and a really good accurate cut. That's completely within range. So now I can just use this piece as a template. I'll cut the other piece, I'll bond these two together, and that'll be my hatch door. There might be a little bit of framing that goes into that. I'm gonna have to work that out, but so far so good. I'm building a hatch on a deck. This panel, I have 6-inch fiberglass cloth on each side of the panel. This panel, there's fiberglass cloth on the other side of this writing. And I'm just gonna make a sandwich. I've used epoxy. I wetted out both panels. I put some wood flour in the epoxy to slightly thicken it, and I really have that around the edges of this panel. So I'm just going to place this piece on top of this piece, and I got some boards. I'll put some weight on it, and I'm just going to glue these panels together so I have a reinforced laminate plywood for the hatch, so it'll be strong enough to stand. I'll make a scuppered gunwale. I'm gonna coat these 3 pieces of wood with this Gorilla Glue. I'm gonna clamp it together, let that set over tonight, and tomorrow I'll be able to make my little spacer blocks to form my scuppers with it. And it's really a decorative element. You know, we got these different tone of woods. We got a little bit of oak in there. We got some of this mystery wood that's in my pile, and I think that once we get some epoxy on that, it'll just give it a nice look. Here's an example of that spacer block that I made. So I used that. I made some different sizes, and I've set that in there, glued it in, ran some screws. When you make a block like this, you can't just run a screw into it. You have to do a pilot hole so that it doesn't split out the wood. The other things I've accomplished so far, I put the rub rail on. I just glued that on and screwed it. We have the deck mocked up. I have to fiberglass those 2 panels together. I'm starting to mock up the seat in the back. I have some cedar, I have some pine, just little scrap pieces I have. I'll use thickened epoxy to glue all that together. Once I get most of it made, I'll open that up, and I have some leftover pour-in foam that I can mix up and fill this seat full of foam. You need a little extra flotation if you're going to have a motor on it. A wood boat won't sink. You don't need a ton of additional flotation. About as big of a motor I'm going to put on here is maybe a 3.5 horse, 5 horse. So we're looking at maybe around 50 pounds. But when it comes to finishing out everything, this is really just to taste. I mean, you could put a couple more benches in here. I think if I was really going to be doing some hard motoring, I would probably go ahead and add a frame connecting these knees. If I flex the boat, there's a little bit of torsion in here. I don't know if I'm going to leave it like that at this point or not. I might just fiberglass the inside of the panels. I mean, I'm asking a lot out of this glue on, and I thought that these rails at the top might strengthen it up enough. I have a tendency to overbuild things. I have a tendency to make things too heavy. I'm not sure if I'm justified being as concerned or not, but I'll probably just go ahead and paint the outside and put it in the water and see what happens. And then, you know, if I need to adjust it, I can change the inside and add a couple frames across the floor if I need to. Well, we have the shop foreman inspecting our work. All right, we're at my least favorite stage of the build. We're kind of fairing out the hull a little bit. At my skill level, it would probably take me a good 3 weeks to make this super smooth, super slick, glass-like surface. And because this is the purpose of this boat is to be more utilitarian, sliding in and out of the truck bed, sliding down in the canals, I'm not going to spend a ton of time fairing the hull. At this point, I've just gave it a good rough sanding. I've got down the most offensive high spots. I'm going to run a bead of thickened epoxy down the rub rail to make sure that no water gets underneath that. Then I'll just scuff it up with some fine sandpaper and put a paint job on it. We're just going to use some enamel paint. Got a little bit more work back here on the transom. There's a couple spots I need to fill in where I screwed a board to the top. But I'm going to round this off and I'm going to fiberglass down over the edge. So the transom won't be ready for the paint, but the rest of the hull is nearly there. Here's a little example of what sloppy work will do for you. See this line? This is just one strand of fiberglass that got slopped up over the top, and it would take a good bit of sanding to get that off of there. So if you really want to make your life easier, when you lay stuff down, lay it clean, or you're going to have to do a lot of sanding. I was digging through the pantry to see what kind of paint I had, and this safety orange gloss is mostly full. I think I used it for lettering the registration on a different Jon boat, but I thought, well, maybe this would be a nice color for this particular boat. And most excitingly, keeping with this budget theme, I scored this 2.5 horse Johnson Seahorse that this fella had gone through in Crystal River. Just a guy that likes to tinker in his shed. So we got that for 200 bucks, so that's a heck of a deal. Cut out a board to put a little cap on the bow, mainly because I wanted to have a ledge to be able to pick the boat up by. So instead of just having a handle sticking off the front, I'm just going to have that whole edge, so if I need to pick it up from the front, or I'll probably end up making a little cart to strap to the back, and I can pull it around a little bit easier. And it's something super simple. Got the first coat of, oh, this is actually the second coat of paint. You know, when I do, I'm going to fiberglass over this cap because this is really old wood. I need to make sure it stays dry. I found this wood in the attic of a house I bought that was built in 1950. So chances are that wood's older than I am, you know, along with the rub rail. So getting everything sealed up, getting some paint on it. I'm getting a little bit better at laying the fiberglass. If I was to fair out this hull, it wouldn't be as much work as it would have been in the past. But so far, so good. I'm working on the hatch for the compartment in the bow. I rounded off the edges of the hatch, and I have fiberglass tape that I've gone around the edges with, and then I'll have to do another layer of fiberglass on the other side. That way I can really seal up the edges to keep the water out of this wood. The hull is painted now. This orange paint didn't cover very well. I had to do about 4 coats to get a really good coverage. A little piece of cedar on the front. Gives me a little ledge to pick up the bow. Considering I didn't spend a ton of time fairing the hull, it's not too bad. There's a couple places where there's some runs and drips. And after I test the boat, here in about 2 years, I'd need to paint it again. And if I really love it, I'll spend some time and really make it beautiful. Right now, I just want to get it in the water and test it. We're in the middle of summer. The kids are out of school. I want to go on some adventures like yesterday. So I'm getting in a little bit of a hurry, but I can always come back to it. I'm going to use this 2-part urethane pour-in foam to fill up the seat cavity for some flotation. and I have everything set up. I got cardboard and masking tape to try to not make a mess. I've only used this stuff one time. I'm not real sure on how much I should mix up, so I'm going to do smaller pours instead of one big pour. I don't want everything just to pour right out and make a mess everywhere, so if I have to go at this a couple times, I'm okay with that. And this is old product. I'm about to see if it can sit around for a couple years not being used. I'll make up one small test batch, and if it goes okay, then that's what we're going to do. All right, the test batch worked. This chemical's been sitting around for a couple years. You mix it to a 1-to-1 ratio. You get it stirred up a little bit, start getting it activated, and then you can just pour it in. So I'm going to pour it into this cavity. And it starts to foam pretty quick, so you don't have a lot of time to get it out of the container. Hopefully gravity will get this nice in the bottom of this chamber. And hopefully I've mixed up a good amount so that it doesn't overdo it. I have the boat tilted on its side, and when it comes time to do this side, we're going to flip it the other way, set up this cardboard barrier system to help hedge against any extreme mess that I'm likely to cause. And from different comments I've seen from people, this pouring foam can react different with different temperature and humidity, and it's humid and it's hot, so we'll see what happens today. Hopefully it's not a terrible mess. And as you can see, the foam is rising to fill up this container. The combined 2 5/8 cup, or 625 milliliters, expanded out to be just about perfect as far as what I was aiming for. And I made very minimal mess, which is out of character for me. So this morning, I got lucky. I have the other side in process now. Trying to get some expansion. I mixed up just a little bit more to hopefully close this gap in the middle without making too much of a mess. There are different poundages of foam, so it's 2 pound, 4 pound, 8 pound, 16 pound, and these poundages represent different densities of foam. And the 2 pound foam is pretty weak, it's more for flotation. 16 pounds supposed to get as hard as pine wood. I've never used it, but there are different reasons why you might use one product versus the next. And it expands out within a few minutes. This isn't a very long process. See, it's getting higher. Now we're making foam. There is a limit on how far the foam can expand in the chamber as far as flowing through a distance, and we might have reached that point. I mixed up a little bit more for this side than I did the other side, and pretty much getting to about the same space. So it would be interesting to see if I used a little bit less, if it would have made it to the same level or not. Like I say, I'm not an expert with the foam. I'm learning, and I hope you can learn from what I'm doing, the good, bad, and the ugly. When I was trying to make the decision of whether or not I should fill this cavity with foam, I had thought about making a mold outside of the boat that I could just make a chunk of foam that would fit the exact dimensions, and then I could trim it all up and just slide it in there and install the wood planks over the top. Boston whaler boats, I believe they pour foam in the cavities. When I was at a boat show, I was looking at an Everglades boat, and they cast the foam into chunks and then they insert it into the hull. So this last little bit, I mixed up what I thought would be lucky. I'm sure it's going to mushroom out of here. Now, to what degree, we'll have to see. when it does mushroom out, it's easy to trim off any excess. That's not that big of a deal. I think if you used a 16-pound foam, you'd run into the problems, but this 4-pound, it's pretty easy to clean up and trim. Even still, I have some plastic and cardboard to keep it from getting on parts I don't want to have foam on. A little bit of void over here. This side filled up well. If the boat was more level, I probably wouldn't ran into this particular issue, but oh, I think I've gotten pretty lucky this morning with this foam project. Now I have my chamber filled with foam. Had a little break in my dam, but if that's all the mess that I made, then I'm doing all right. Let's scrape that right off there. So now I'll just take a little tree saw, like one of these blow saws, and I'll just trim that out of there nice and flat. We'll be ready to put on that last plank. All right, I've taken fiberglass tape and went around all the edges of the deck. I have 2 layers of fiberglass around these hatch frames, just really trying to make sure that no water gets in the wood of the deck. And I put fiberglass over the seat / flotation pod. I brought the fiberglass clear down this top edge over the corners, and here's the transom. I've put a piece of fiberglass cloth over top of that, and I made a little support plate for the transom to help transfer the torsion forces of the motor down the entire transom instead of just that top board. So one more bit of sanding, a little bit more epoxy sealing up the fiberglass, and we'll be ready for the spar varnish, and this thing will be finished, other than whatever lights and cleats and other parts that I want to put on it. You know, at this point, I'm in for about $400 on this project. And I bought a couple light pieces, I bought a couple cleats, I bought some hinges for the hatch on the deck. And from here on, it can get really expensive. The more you add to it, the fancier products you use. I mean, there's always a range. They got plastic stuff, they got stainless steel, there's aluminum. But finishing out the boats can be quite expensive. I mean, there's a big difference between a $15,000 cedar strip canoe and then this little wood boat here. And a lot of that is in the finish work. So you just have to decide how far you want to take it, how far you want to push your skills, and but it's all up to you. The build's nearly complete. I have to do a light sanding and start putting spar varnish on all the areas that I'm going to leave the wood finish. This morning I'm putting holes in the frames to run some electric wire. I have a hole for the rear navigation light. Here's a spot where my obligatory bug showed up to ruin my finish. I'll have to put a hole in the front for the navigation lights. I haven't decided if I'm going to put 2 in the corners or if one is going to be center. I have a couple cleats that'll go up on these edges somewhere. I have to buy a couple cleats here for the back. Maybe not completely necessary, but I like how the stainless steel looks. So it's just kind of give me a little bit of options to lash things to, tie it down in the truck, but really just adds to the cost of the build. But this is pretty much what it's going to look like when it's finished. My safety orange paint job, that ended up working pretty nice. My bench seat with the reclaimed wood. From here on out, it'll be a lot of drying time and a little bit of work. The boat is ready for its first test run. Let's give a quick little overview. Got my navigation lights. Got the hatch. Got some electric under that rub rail. There's some power posts back here to run a trolling motor off of, and eventually I'll stick a bilge pump on there. Got the boat registered so we can put it under power. We got a dry storage where we can stick a battery in there. A couple more details I'll finish up. The varnish is not liking the weather, so I got a couple coats on there. It's about as good as it's going to be for now. In the fall, I'll probably come back and tune it up. But overall, it's looking pretty good. So it's working pretty good. It's a little more tipsy than I was hoping for, but you can stand up. You can stand up and fish. It levels out pretty good. I have a battery in the bow to run the trolling motor. So we'll give this a test run with the trolling motor and see what it does. Thank you for watching Beau's workshop, and I hope you join me for the next build.